Introduction. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Beach Nourishment Easement Community Meeting for Indian Rocks Beach residents. Thank you for being patient with us as we navigate this new world and new technology. Just an FYI, this meeting is being recorded. We'll have the recording available after the meeting for any of those who are unable to attend, or if you just like to see the meeting again, you think you missed some spots or had to take a phone call or anything, we will have this available. We've assembled a panel of people who know a lot about this project and beach nourishment. So you'll be hearing from a few of them, and the others will be here to answer any potential questions after the presentation. So let me just start by introducing the panel. And panelists, when I say your name, can you just please give me a wave and unmute and just say hello so that everyone can see you. So first and foremost, we have Mayor Kennedy.
Hi.
We have John Bishop.
Hello.
Dr. John Bishop. We have Vice Mayor Phil Hanna.
I'm here.
We have Commissioner Diane Flagg.
Here.
We have Kem Goral, our Office of Counsel for Army Corps Engineers.
I'm here. I don't know if you can hear me or not, though.
We can hear you. Thank you,
Okay,
Kem.
good. Thanks.
We have Jim Lagrone, our Engineering Team Lead for Army Corps of Engineers.
Good evening, everyone.
Hi, Jim. We have Will Riley, also with Army Corps.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Will. And we have Brenda. We'll be getting her in here shortly as well, also with the Army Corps. Just having some issues, as always, with these things. So I just want to kick it over first to Mayor Kennedy. Thank you so much for hosting this and helping us navigate the world of beach nourishment at Indian Rocks Beach. Thanks, Mayor. Hello.
Well, thank you, Ashley, and thank you all for assembling this meeting today. I want to also thank Commissioner Flagg and Vice Mayor Hanna for being a part of it, as well as everyone else from the county and the Corps of Engineers. And you know, basically with that, I think that we should just go ahead and start with the, questions and answers, or the history of the project would probably be the best thing to start with. And Ashley, will you be doing the history of the project?
So that'll be John. That's the next thing. So okay. I just wanted to say, we will have a formal presentation, and then afterwards we'll do the Q&A period. For any of those that are on watching, you may type the questions in Zoom, or you can virtually raise your hand at any time. We will answer questions after the presentation. We just ask that you limit your questions to under 2 minutes so that we can get as many people in as possible. And like we said, if you're uncomfortable with speaking your question, you can always type it into the questions. So Dr. John Bishop, welcome. Thank you for being here. Can you give a little background as to who you are and then present, please?
Yes, I'm Dr. John Bishop. I head up our coastal management section. We manage our beach nourishment projects, coastal structures that we've built up on beach, places like that. It's pretty much the beach stabilization stuff. That's what the county handles. I'm also joined on this call by Zach Westfield, who is my brand new employee who's here to help me. So I'm not a team of one, now I'm a team of two. So we can get double the work done, which is great. I think everyone, and we're also here with the Army Corps, a great team from the Army Corps who will be able to answer more specific questions regarding this project. But I'm going to start it off with a presentation first, try to cover as much as I can, and then we'll go into questions and answer the questions that aren't covered in the slides. So can everyone see the first slide for the agenda? Okay. So basically, I'm going to cover the history of the project, why nourishment is needed, key easement provisions, where the easements are located, and sort of what the current status of this project is. And I have a little clip here. I don't claim to be any kind of a real estate mogul or Nostradamus, but there is a article here from 2015 done by Duke, and they're much smarter than me. And it talks about the value of nourishment projects and the value that has on real estate prices, and sort of the looming bubble where sort of the property values are propped up because of the wide beaches and the protection that's created by the Army Corps projects. So there's a link here. You guys can click on it when you get the presentation online and see the full article. This is just the top portion of it. So we actually have 3 federal projects. We have one at Sand Key, one at Treasure Island, and one at Long Key. And the Treasure Island and Long Key segments are currently going through a reauthorization process to extend their authorization for another 50 years. So those 2 projects currently expire in 2025 and in 2030. The Sand Key project was constructed a lot later, and so that one won't expire federally until 2043. And that comprises Clearwater Beach, Belleair Beach, Indian Rocks Beach, Indian Shores, Reddington Shores, and North Reddington Beach. Overall, Pinellas County has about 35 miles of beaches. 21.4 are considered critically eroded by the state. And those make them, and that designation makes them eligible for nourishment projects funding, things along that nature. We have about 12 miles that are restored regularly. 9 of those make up that Sand Key project area from Clearwater to North Reddington Beach. And on average, our program spends about $10 million per year to do this. So the project was first authorized by Congress in 1966. Went through several agreements before we actually were able to begin constructing with the Army Corps. In 1985 and 1986, erosion control lines were set. That sort of marks where mean high water is before the projects begin. And that fixes the property boundary at mean high water so that the new additional sand shoreline width isn't added to the private property owner, but stays within the state's lands. The state doesn't want to lose sovereign submerged lands any more than the upland owner wants to lose their land. So it just becomes emerged basically above the water. In 1988, the first federal shore protection project was constructed at Reddington Shores. And in 1990, I believe Indian Rocks Beach was first nourished for the first time. It was either 90 or 92. That first nourishment was done in 3 phases, 88, 90, and 92. So it covered all of the beaches except for Belleair Beach and Clearwater. During that time frame, we used temporary construction easements to nourish the project. Here's some background on each of the projects we've had and some of the amount of sand and the amount of money it's cost to put the sand there. So in all, we've placed about 10.9 million cubic yards of sand along these beaches. This is just the Sand Key project. So Clearwater to North Reddington Beach doesn't include Treasure Island and Long Key at a cost of about $142.3 million. And you can also see that in general, the amount of sand has begun decreasing over time. And that's because we're sort of in a maintenance phase where we're, we've constructed the project, we've built out the beach, but the beach is still eroding and we're replacing the amount of sand that erodes in 6 years. And we just keep putting it back as a buffer zone. The new sand erodes away. So the shoreline hasn't retreated beyond where you guys have noticed, usually right before a nourishment project. It gets up to about where the dune line is, and then we put the sand back. And so that's why that dune line has been pretty stagnant and steady. Most recently, we placed a little bit more, and that was because of Hermine and Irma. And that's also why the project cost was a little bit more too, 42.7 million. And a lot of that was actually storm damage funds from the federal government, not the Army Corps' money, but a different source that paid for a good chunk of that project right off the top, which was good. At the right, you can see the segments that were nourished. So the first one in 1988 is down in Reddington Shores and North Reddington Beach. 1990 is Indian Rocks Beach, and then we did Indian Shores, and we redid Reddington Shores and North Reddington Beach in 92. And those are the first phase of the project. That's considered the nourishment. After that, we've had 4 successive re-nourishments to replace the sand on the beach. The dotted lines that you see in the most recent segment that was done in 2018, those are the segments that were skipped because we had a lack of easements. So this may sound like a silly question, but why maintain a wide sandy beach? Well, one of the main reasons is storm protection. And I'm going to run through a few before and after images from when Hurricane Elena came through to compare to what it looks like today. And also a map here. And I'm going to do my best to transfer myself here to a different program. So bear with me. Okay. This is a map that's available on the website. We'll post the slides to the website as well, and you can just double click on this map and it will take you right to this web link to go and look at this web map. What this is an aerial image from 1990. So it was after that very first nourishment down in Reddington Shores, which I'll show you in a second, but the template is down here. And then this marks where the fill template was. And then 2014. And this was designed so you could see what the beach looked like in 1990 versus what it looks like today. It's been a while, so, you know, and we have a lot of new residents, so, but in 1990, this is how wide the beach was. And today, this is where the shoreline is. So basically, the waves were at the edge of where the dune is today. That's a significantly large amount of sand that's out there. We built all of that beach as part of the Nourishment project. And we're just replacing the sandy portion essentially. And that's what keeps the dune in place, which affords a lot of protection. And it pretty much looks like this up and down the beach. So you can always go through, at this portion, it was a seawall. And keep in mind, 1990 was 5 years after Hurricane Elena came through. And those are the photos I'm going to show you next. Let's just wrap it up by going to the north end so that we can show what it looks like across all of Indian Rocks Beach. So it's pretty consistent. Before the Nourishment projects, there wasn't a lot of sand out there. At best, there was probably a wet beach that you'd walk along. You know, at worst, it was always a wet beach, and it would never dry out, even at low tide. I know I've heard a lot of stories about people who lived here, and as kids, they would have to jump down off the seawall. A lot of these places along this seawall actually have stairs that have been buried for so long, people don't even remember they're still there. Hopefully we never get to see them again. So now, if I can switch back to the presentation. I'll go through some before and after slides. Is everyone seeing these? Just give me a thumbs up, Ashley. Okay, I want to make sure if I was on the right screen or not. So this is the very north end of the project area. I know it as R72. These are the range monuments that are up and down the beach. It's how we do our surveys. But this would be 26th Avenue. So it's at the very north end. There's a set of condos here that are sort of L-shaped. And this is right after Hurricane Elena came through. And during that time, there was a lot of wooden seawalls, wooden groins, things like that. Some of the wooden groins might actually still be there. I don't know. They could be buried under the sand. But this is what it looks like today. And you'll have to forgive me on the lack of the horrible picture because you don't see a lot of beach. But it's because I wanted to make sure I maintain the positioning of the before-after photo. You can see how I lined it up with some of those red lines with the building. And that's because sometimes you see two photos and one zoomed out really far and you can't tell if the beach is thinner because it's zoomed out or if it's, I figured the aspect ratio is better to maintain. But I think you all know what the shoreline looks like seaward of this. There's a dune, there's beach, there's a seawall. It's behind that tree. So here is R75 or 17th Avenue in Indian Rocks Beach looking south. And again, I've got a condo marked out there in the positioning so you can see the before and after. There's a bit of a fence here. This is a little bit better of a picture. There's dune, beach, and water off to the right. I think the main takeaway though is that basically the ocean is so far to the right that you can't really see it well in the photo. There's a lot of beach and dune and sand in front of it.
John, how long ago was that picture? The one that
This one?
Yes.
This was taken 1985, post Hurricane Elena by DEP. And I believe the guy that took these photos is still there, actually. So these are the photos I'm sort of, now I know and I understand that this is post-hurricane, but keep in mind too that the hurricane never made landfall. It did a loop-de-loop out in the Gulf that went up and hit the panhandle. So this isn't even a direct hit and it did this much damage. But, I think the takeaway is that, this project was authorized in 1966. There wasn't a lot of sand here in 1974 either when the state first did their first beach profiles up to this area. So this has been a pre-existing problem well before Hurricane Elena hit. Hurricane Elena just happened to hit when there was no beach for protection. And so here's further down 15th Avenue looking north. And you got a wide dune there and there's a beach off to the west or the left. 15th Avenue. And still more beach off to the right there. And I have these going all the way down the beach to kind of show that it's consistent and I didn't just pick, cherry pick locations. If I'm showing the whole beach, it sort of is what it is. So here you can see the old seawall location. These are the wooden groins. I don't know if they're still there. They could be. I doubt anyone took them out before they put sand in. So they're probably still buried under the dune. So there was a little bit of sand there, but that's still, the rack line is up at the seawall. There's certainly not a lot of protection afforded by that beach because the seawall is the highest thing around. And it's a very thin beach that's probably wet most of the time. Now there's a nice wide dune that provides a lot of protection and a beach further seaward than that. So there's a lot of benefits afforded by having a nice wide beach, more than just storm protection. It also provides a lot of habitat. Our beaches are nesting and foraging habitat for sea turtles and shorebirds and several foraging shorebirds as well, including the piping plover and the red knot. The red knot is actually a very interesting bird because it flies from basically the southern tip of Chile all the way up to the Antarctic every year. So it basically goes from the South Pole to the North Pole to nest and then back. And it likes to rest here along the way because I can imagine it's a very tiring flight. And here is, and this is at R84, so it's at Central Avenue, and you can see the nice wide beach that's there now versus what it looked like post Hurricane Elena. So we already talked about the storm damage reduction benefits that the project affords. Here's another good photo. Now we're hitting the very south end of Indian Rocks Beach, right at Whitehurst. So we have a nice exposed seawall here and a very thin shoreline. The water is actually up to the seawall at the properties to the south. And now there's a nice wide beach. Looks a lot nicer, and there's a lot more protection because the storm's going to have to erode through all that sand. And the higher elevation of the dune is also going to help on keeping that surge back. So, you know, the third benefit, other than environmental and protection, that is one of the biggest benefits to the county, is tourism. So this study was done in 2015. It's a little outdated. I'm sure the numbers are higher now, probably even this year. But beach tourists, so tourists who came to Pinellas County just to visit our beaches, spent $2.3 billion per year, or in 2015. So if you make it a per year, but $2.3 billion in 2015. They directly supported about 47,000 jobs, and they contributed $145 million in state and local taxes. So, you know, that's a lot of jobs that wouldn't be here without tourism. That's a lot of money going to the local businesses, the hotels, the coffee shops, wherever. And that's also a lot of local taxes that we as residents don't have to pay. And here's the before after at this location. This is Indian Shores. So it's pretty much throughout the project area that you see little to no sand along the seawall prior to the Sand Key project coming through. So I just want to show you guys how quickly, because that was Hurricane Elena, it was post-hurricane, there was no beach out there, but what would happen today if the storm hit? Well, we've had a couple of them actually come through and close calls over the last couple of years. So the first one that I'll show is Hermine. Irma didn't show as much damage because it was all sort of down by the water line or below the water line. As you'll remember, Tampa Bay actually emptied at one point and people were walking out. And because all that wave action was actually lower, sort of the reverse of a surge, a lot of the erosion occurred at the water line or below. So that's, those photos won't be as visually interesting because you can't see it, it's all under the water. So I'm going to stick to Hermine. And this is up at Dan's Island. It's the largest change we had, so I wanted to show that to you. And I'm just calling out now that it's the largest one, at least the one I saw. And this is a before after photo. And keep in mind, Hermine was only a tropical storm when it went by. It didn't become a hurricane until further north. It didn't make landfall here. And up at R60 in Belleair Beach, they lost 30 feet of dune. Now, you can see that in the beach profile. So the pre-Hermine profile, let me explain what a beach profile is first. So a beach profile is collected when a surveyor collects the elevation and distance from the monument. So those arm monuments I was talking about, you might see them once in a while. They're a brass disc sitting in a seawall. The surveyor goes on that disc, they get the elevation, they go 10 feet and along a specific line down the beach, and they catch an elevation and they keep going out into the water. This one went out about 500 feet. And that's how they basically collect a beach profile. So it's sort of like if you took a slice of cake and you looked at the inside and you saw all the layers, that's, the contour on the top of the cake would be what this line is depicting. And so this is the profile that was collected before, sorry, getting ahead of myself here, before Hermine, and this is the one that was collected after. So you can also see that 30 feet of change that is depicted in the photo right in the beach profile. This isn't the exact same location, but they're about 500 feet apart. So it's pretty close. So you can see how quickly the beach can change due to a storm. And I want you to keep that in mind later when we start talking about where we need easements. Because one Hermine can change the position of where the beach is by 30 feet, and that was just a tropical storm, you know, what would a Category 3 do? Especially if it was a direct hit, even if it just sat offshore. So Indian Rocks Beach, trying to get one a little bit closer to home. This one was only 20 feet, but it was still a pretty big change. And you can see off to the right, the scarping and the dune. And you can also see that change reflected in the beach profile, the blue one being before and the yellow being after. So you can see how the shoreline eroded away during Hermine. All right. One more time. So that's a pretty big change considering it didn't even make landfall. This is a similar plot to that for a different purpose, but I think it's good to show. This sort of shows what the beach looked like in profile form before the nourishments came through. So in 1974, the state of Florida actually did a bunch of beach profiles up and down the beach, and this is one of those. At least the black line is. The red line is a photo that was a beach profile that was collected by the Army Corps for one of our projects. So you can see how far back the shoreline was. Do you guys see my pointer, by the way? Okay. So you can see how thin the shoreline was. Each of these crosshatches, by the way, I actually did the calculation before this meeting, is about 70 feet. So the beach at mean high water, which is still wet, that's below wave run up, usually, by about a foot or so, probably, maybe 2. Mean high water is, oh, I lost my pointer here, is about 35 feet or so. It's about midway between those red crosshatches. So before the beach nourishment projects began, the beach was maybe 3 feet in elevation at most along the edge of the seawall and dropped down to within 35 feet, which is probably a lot closer than you think. It's not a very wide beach at all. Dropped down to mean high water. So the vast majority of this beach would have been wet. There probably at some tides, it probably was wet at some of the higher tides. At some of the lower ones, there might have been a little bit of dry sand at the top, but there was not a whole lot of sand here in 1974 prior to the nourishment projects. And this was also 10 years prior to Elena. And then looking at this profile here, this is what the shoreline currently looks like. So there's a much larger dune over where the existing beach used to be. And there's a nice wide beach for recreation. In all, at mean high water, at that elevation, the new beach here is 163 feet wider than the pre-nourishment beach back in 74. So that's 163 feet of environmentally sensitive and recreational area as well that get to be utilized by our residents, which is a lot more attractive than, you know, a seawall and some wooden groins. So annually, our beaches across our Sand Key project area lose about 11 feet per year. We renourish every 6 years, so you know the numbers make sense for the amount we have to renourish. We're not putting additional sand out there. We're pretty much just putting it back every 6 years to the sort of the post-construction level. And then as that erodes away, 6 years later, we go and put that back again. So it's a bit redundant, but it keeps the existing beach there. That equates to about 3.6 cubic yards per foot per year. That's a very weird unit of measure to wrap your head around, but it's basically 3.6 cubic yards for every 1 foot wide slice of beach. So if you drew 2 lines down the beach 1 foot apart, the change between those 2 lines is 3.6 cubic yards, which equates to about a dump truck load for every 3 foot wide slice of beach, or my favorite analogy for that is a 10 ounce cup of coffee per foot per hour. So if you sit out on the beach and you drink a cup of coffee and it takes you an hour, unless you drink one the size of the one I drink, you know, that's how much sand will have washed away in an hour. So public use and access. So in 1986, the Water Resources Development Act, and before I begin this, I just want, you know, this is really stuff that's closer to the Army Corps of Engineers wheelhouse. I'll present it and they can answer the questions at the end, but if I say something that's incorrect, please stop me, because this is their information. So the 1986 Water Resource Development Act, Section 103D, prohibits federal participation in costs assigned to benefits of privately owned shores, where the use of such shores is limited to private interests. So in this 1986, it does predate our 1988 nourishment, but also the Army Corps didn't develop a standard template for perpetual public access easements, which they wanted to apply to their shore protection projects until 1996. So our projects kind of went right in between the two. So prior to the initial construction of the shore protection project, much of the Sandkey project that you've seen has been eroded back to the seawall. We didn't obtain these perpetual easements at that time. The easement didn't exist until 1996. And then, so easements are still needed over portions of the beach lying on private property. So during the 2018 project, we looked at the where we needed easements and determined that there was 461 parcels that we needed to get easements over, which is sort of encompassing where the federal government filled back in 1988, because these easements cover that full project area. So during that time, I think the Corps realized that we weren't going to get 461 easements in a year and a half. So they gave us, they let us focus on those easements where they physically needed to put the sand in order to proceed, because they can't put sand on private property. But they did say that we would need the remaining easements in the future. So for future projects, we need all of the easements wherever sand was historically placed. And these easements are important because they allow the Army Corps and the county to quickly respond to the next hurricane. Some of the easements we're requesting are inside the dune. For Indian Rocks Beach, a lot of the easements, probably the vast majority actually, are within the dune and don't even encroach onto the beach area. But keep in mind how quickly 30 feet of dune can disappear. When you're trying to fund, finance, and design a project 2 years in advance, and you have 2 more storm seasons, by the time your contractor gets out there, even the day before your contractor gets out there, that dune line can shift by 30 feet overnight. And then the Army Corps can't build the project because they can't put the sand over there. So we need these easements to cover the full template so that from a readiness standpoint, the Army Corps can construct when they need to, when a storm happens. Now, when a storm does happen, typically they are supposed to use the funding for the nourishment project prior to the next storm season. So this, you know, we don't have 3 years, 4 years to build this project. Typically, these things happen in less than a year. And so you need to be ready to move very quickly when a storm happens or after a storm to put the beach back. So the real estate requirements must be met in order to proceed with any future beach nourishment projects. And the Army Corps has told me that that's 100% of the perpetual easements obtained. They need to be obtained. Government real estate requirements apply nationwide, and it's highly unlikely that the real estate requirements can be waived for any one particular project. So really, it's up to the residents of Indian Rocks Beach. No one can sign these easements but you, and we need your help in order to make sure that this project keeps going. To give you an idea of how many projects the Corps is dealing with, these aren't limited to Army Corps involved beach nourishment projects. I was trying to find a map that would show that. This is the best I could come up with. This is from ASBPA's National Beach Nourishment Database. All of the yellow dots are nourishment projects. But I would venture to guess that the vast majority are probably have federal involvement. In case you're wondering about the nourishment projects in Maine, those are actually related to beneficial use of dredge sediments. So it's making nourishment projects because they had the dredge channel. They weren't necessarily building recreational beaches in Maine. Not that there's anything wrong with that. It seems a bit cold. So the easement language currently states, and these are several provisions that are within the easement. I tried to summarize the key points. The easement's perpetual, and that's because we need to be ready to move. We don't want to have to get easements prior to every project. There's 461 of these. And sometimes after a storm, you need to be ready to move within a year. So it's not practical to obtain easements project by project. And it's also a core requirement. All of these are core requirements. So it's not just the county saying it. This is the standard, language that needs to be included in these easements. They need to allow for public use. And that public use is a requirement of the federal funding. Without that public use, the federal government won't cost share. And they cost share about 60% of this project. So in a $42 million project, that's a significant portion. Actually, it was more for that one because 20 million of it was FCCE funds. And then the core cost shared in the remaining amount at 60%. So they actually paid a really big portion of this last project. It's also to construct the beach nourishment. It excludes permanent structures, so we can't build jetties, groins, breakwaters with it. And it does not authorize the construction of dune systems. You'll see that on the right-hand side, we remove dunes. We also remove berms, which aren't dunes, but are the actual beach. It's a term for the beach that we're building, but we figured it was covered within nourishment. The Corps let us remove it because people thought berms were dunes. We remove plant vegetation because there was a lot of worry that we'd be planting vegetation and building dunes that way. There's been a lot of worry about dunes. So we decided, instead of trying to find a way to make the language fit every scenario that everyone wanted, we would just add, does not authorize the construction of dune systems, so that it would cover it. This other language over here, that's for nourishment. We just called it out. And this is, I think it's a portion of the easement. I don't remember, I think it's all of the easement, but it doesn't have the signature block at the end. And I just wanted to bring this up to show you what you can expect. Most of the people on this call should already have a copy of the easement. And you'll see I underlined several of the sections that were noted in the first one, in the first part. It's for public use, perpetual, for the construction and operation of beach nourishment, and it does not authorize the construction of dunes. So those dunes that are out there now actually afford a lot of protection because the state protects dunes, or pretty much anything west of the coastal construction control line. It's highly regulated. They don't allow a whole lot of building, a whole lot of anything west of the coastal construction control line. It's pretty much an exclusion. I'll let the state, if you have any questions about what can be built there, you have to talk to the state because I don't regulate that. But there's very little you can do west of the coastal construction control line, and they can actually enforce people who damage sea oats and other things. So you can't traipse all over the dunes, smashing sea oats, pulling them out, or doing whatever anyway. So with a dune there, even with perpetual public access, there's really limited use of the dune. People can't really go on it. At least they shouldn't be, because it's protected. So here's a cross section to show sort of the area we're talking about for where the easement is located. So back in 1988, when the ECL was set, mean high water would have been located where the erosion control line is. So a surveyor went along the shoreline. I guess it would have been better if I had a profile from that time on here, but they would walk along the shoreline at this location and survey the line. So this becomes the fixed property boundary. Instead of moving with accretions and erosion, it stays in one place. And then once the state does that, then the Corps came in and filled this area. So this area here didn't just suddenly add to the upland property owner's property. This area here still remains state. It's just now above the water. The property owner over here still owns this property. And that's why we need to get an easement over this area, because it is private. and because we need to be able to, the Army Corps needs to be able to fill their fill template. Their fill project, it may look like there's not a lot of engineering behind it because, essentially it's, playing in a sandbox and building putting a bunch of sand out on the beach, but there's a lot of design and engineering that goes behind it, behind the elevation, behind the slopes. And all of that's designed around either meeting different sea turtle needs or also storm protection. And so the elevation of that beach is designed to mitigate and to prevent storm damage to the upland properties. And so that needs to be maintained. Also, they can't leave low spots behind because that can allow ponding of water. So the Corps needs to be able to fill the full template. They can't alter it at each location. And sometimes that area on the landward side goes on private property. And these are the areas we need easements for. So for tracking purposes, I also have this on the, there's a link to this on our website. There's also a link to this in the PowerPoint. When you get the PowerPoint, you can click on it and it'll take you to this web app that shows the tracking of our easement acquisition. So far, we've received 217 out of 461 easements. So it's about 47%. Indian Rocks Beach, we've gotten 71 out of 180. So we're doing a little bit lower than, we're doing about 40%. Indian Shores, we have almost 50%, and Reddington Shores, we're doing about 28%. The remaining cities, we pretty much have everything we need. So Clearwater and Belleair Beach, we have all the easements except one, which is they're just trying to figure out what they need to go to sign the easement. And then North Reddington Beach, we have all the easements, and there was actually 2 in Reddington Beach that we got when we extended the erosion control line. I'm not going to click into this and switch programs because it's pretty self-explanatory. You can zoom in, you can zoom out. The little red squares show areas where we don't have an easement yet. The green ones show areas where we do. And then the totals are all tracked over here. So the current state of acquisition. So this was a map I developed to try to show where our project currently is. The Army Corps has said that they need 100% of the easements in order to be able to fill. So they've also said that during the last project, we used this 1,500-foot rule where, if we got enough easements to fill, a continuous 1,500-foot length, they could fill that beach. That had different, because we were still filling most of the project area, adding a 1,500-foot segment on wasn't a big inconvenience. The contractor was already going to be there. I don't know if that rule will still hold because I've been told that it won't. So 1,500 feet may no longer be long enough, but it's not going to quite matter anyways, because if you look, all these red areas here are sort of continuous lengths of easements, and so are the green areas. The green areas represent areas that are over 1,500 feet long of continuous easements. The red areas are areas that are smaller than that. So we have about 9,800 feet in Clearwater and Belleair Beach that we can fill. Here's the lengths up here. North Reddington Beach is 4,600. We have 2 segments separated by 1 set of townhomes in Indian Shores that are each about almost, right around 1,500. So together they're a little bit over 3,000, but they each make it on their own. And then the next longest segment we have is 809 feet. So that's about, even going by the rule for the last project, that's half the length that we would need. Now, those happen to be in Indian Shores. The longest one in Indian Rocks Beach right now is 602. So we're about 3 times away. Now, looking at this from an Army Corps feasibility standpoint, and these are just what, the Army Corps hasn't told me this necessarily. It's just that looking at this from a feasibility of construction, and I think you'll all see this, that it's probably not feasible to construct several small segments down in Indian Shores and North Reddington Beach. It's all very far spread out. They're only about 1,500 feet long, a little bit longer. The amount of sand that gets placed in those areas is generally smaller. So considering the infrastructure that has to be brought in, the offloading station, the pipeline corridors, and the amount of monitoring and work that needs to go into actually mobilizing a dredge to these segments, I don't anticipate that the Army Corps will end up including them. With our current state, if things don't change, I'm going to be very happy if we can do Clearwater and Belleair Beach, because it's one continuous segment and it's off to its side and it's separated. So I'm hoping that that is a long enough reach of beach to be able to at least continue the federal project at Sand Key. But it's also very possible that none of this is long enough, because it's just so discontinuous. You can't fill continuous segments of beach. So I'll just leave it on this slide instead of the question slide. And I think we can begin taking questions. Ashley, I don't know if you want to start with the council members first, if they have any questions, or if you want to go straight to.
Yeah, we can start with the council members or Mayor Kennedy if you have any questions, and then we'll head over to any of our attendees. If you want to raise your hand virtually in the, if you click the button to raise your hand in the Zoom, and please, when I call out your name and allow you to speak, please say your full name and your address for the record, and we'll give you 2 minutes to speak. If you're not comfortable with speaking aloud within this forum, please type in a question in the Q&A. We already have several, and once we're done with the Q&A speaking, then I will pose the questions to the panelists who can best answer those questions via text. So thank you. Commissioners or Mayor Kennedy, have any questions?
John, do you intend to have perhaps in another 3 months or so, I don't know the time limit, to have another meeting such as this so that people could hopefully be able to attend in person? Can you answer that?
At this time, I probably can't guarantee anything because I don't think any of us know what's going to happen this winter. I hope that we can have another meeting in person in 3 or so months. I would like to see some kind of a hybrid meeting because I think that there's a lot of benefit to having the online forum as well. There's a lot of residents that I don't even think live in Indian Rocks Beach. It's a summer home. They're not going to fly down here for my meetings. I'm not that prominent. No one cares that much about me.
You're
So,
funny.
I
I think that at some point, whether it was some other kind of hybrid or, meeting, that we possibly should have another one. Some of the residents and those, as you're saying, that don't actually live here full time, were not aware or found out late. And so I suggested that it was suggested to me, and I'm suggesting to you possibly to have another meeting. And I threw out 3 months because I don't have a clue myself, but before it gets, tell everyone the renourishment is how many years away?
The Army Corps can probably speak better to that, but I believe they're looking at probably 2024.
I was thinking it was 4. Okay. I just wanted to make sure about that.
But keep in mind too that budgeting is, the planning for that project happens like at least 2 years before. So.
I hear you. So I would say we have a year, a good year here to try to work on this. I had an interesting conversation today with a homeowner who is not signing and has told me they're not going to sign. And what do you say to homeowners on the Gulf who, regardless if they live here full time or not, who are not going to sign an easement and are under the mindset that don't worry about it, they'll renourish it without the easement?
Well, we've got the Army Corps on the phone, I think they would be better to say what they will or won't do. I mean, all I can do is speculate.
Okay.
Does somebody from the Army Corps want to take that?
Jim or Kem, are you available to take the question from the mayor?
Yeah, so I think we need, like John had said, we need all the easements in order to, conduct that project. We don't want to leave any gaps. Those gaps could cause problems where water could funnel in, and I know the engineers on the line can also speak to this. But it's a concern to ensure that the project is, a viable project.
John, there were a couple places last time that were not renourished. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. And I just want to reiterate that because for whatever reason, maybe these are first time easement signers, okay, that they either don't know that there are places that were not renourished last time because the homeowner or the hotel condominiums did not sign the easement. And then as a result of that, 1,500 feet on each side was not renourished. So if one of us lived on either side of that, we were not renourished as a result of our neighbor not renourishing. And I think that's a strong point that needs to be reiterated. And I tried to explain this. I understand there is some, I don't know if it's a group that is sending out information and they are calling this. And I'm just going to be real here because I grew up here. I've lived my whole life. And I know when we didn't have a beach, and I'm angry because there are people who, whatever way it has to be done that works and is legal, and they're calling it a land grab. As far as in the paperwork that is being sent out for the easements, and they have been mailing these to people. And, what can we do? Is there wording in the easement that we can look at to make some of these people feel safer, or that their property is not going to be disturbed or taken? What can we do?
Any alterations to the easement needs to be run by the Army Corps.
Okay.
Their attorney and their real estate department have to look at it to be sure that it's not a substantial change. And their requirement is the public use. We've put things in there about limiting any kind of, commercial or non-commercial or, enterprises, because people have had concerns that public use meant there would be hot dog stands out there, and
Right.
that because that was an actual,
Well, we were at a
concern.
meeting together, if you remember
Yes.
that, where we had, and I have to say, the Army Corps was awesome. And they bent over backwards to get the easement signed for one of our condominiums. And I appreciated that that they worked with our residents. And I just, I'm hearing these things for the first time about, I knew that there would be people that were concerned about signing, but this was beyond belief today. And I'm aggravated about it because I think that, I asked them to watch today. I asked them, let's meet with whoever, with you or the Corps, and let's talk about this, because I tried to explain that this affects everybody on each side of you if you won't sign. And with that, I see that Diane Flagg has her hand up. Actually, is it okay? And answer.
Yeah, I also want to add to that and just say, a lot of people feel that they'll just get the sand anyways, because even if they don't put it in front of them, they'll put it next to them or further up the beach, and they'll get that sand as it moves down the beach. And I just like to show a picture of Belleair Beach, where we nourish, and Belleair Shore where we don't, and see how quickly it thins out. You know, Belleair Shore has a very tiny beach at the very center, which is, I guess you'd probably want to look directly in between Indian Rocks Beach and Belleair Beach, because it actually gets sand from Indian Rocks Beach and Belleair Beach. It moves in from both sides. And if you look at how thin it is in the very center, I mean, that's what it wants to go back to. If we don't keep putting the sand there, that's what it'll go back to. And keep in mind that this is still being fed by the nourishment projects. Belleair Shore is still getting sand from Belleair Beach and Indian Rocks Beach. Without those nourishment projects, it looks more like that. So I think there's going to be a big change in Belleair Shore. And I think that there's going to be a change in Indian Rocks Beach and, you know, Belleair Beach if we're not able to continue a nourishment project. You can see how quickly this thins out. You know, a project 5 miles away is not going to keep your beach there. You know, the sand volume just isn't there. And you'll eventually see, as it erodes away, this thin part working its way south, further and further south, until the beach thins out across the board. Or it could happen all at once in a, you know, a storm, God forbid. So.
Diane, do you have something you want to ask?
Yes, John, what is the biggest objection to the people that are withholding the authorization? Is it that they don't want sand renourishment, or what is the fear?
No, actually, I don't know. I might have talked to somebody who didn't want sand, but I don't really recall if I ever talked to anyone who didn't want sand during this entire project. I think they all want the sand. They just don't want the language that's in the easement. So number one, it would be the perpetual public access, because people are concerned about that and what that means. And they are, I think that's probably the biggest objection. The second would be they feel that the easement language is broad, and they're worried that it could be misconstrued to do something else. And we've tried to limit it, as you can see, from all the things we removed with dunes. I know dunes can be a very big hot point in Indian Rocks Beach as well. And we have done our best to negate dunes throughout the easement as much as possible. You know, we just want to keep making sure that we can maintain the current project we're doing. But allow shoot for anything more, so.
Is there no favorable language in that agreement that could be a compromise and they would be willing to sign? I mean, if the perpetual part is the hangup, couldn't it be ended after the renourishment and then picked up again at the next renourishment? I mean,
I'll answer this, but it'd be great if the Army Corps could chime in and try to reiterate what I'm about to say, because we've tried that, and I mean that doesn't fly by the Army Corps. If they're going to use federal tax dollars, they want that land that they're using those federal tax dollars to put sand on to be open to the public in perpetuity. And they feel that that's a requirement that's placed on them by WRDA.
and all along the shoreline,
right?
on the coast of the United States, all of those people are signing easements, perpetual easements to get their sand renourished?
Yes, this is Jim Burrell with the Corps, and so the perpetual easement is a nationwide Corps requirement. You know, we are using federal funds to benefit the public. We're not benefiting individual landowners, and so since we're putting sand on the beach, we want the public to benefit from that, and that's the reason for that public use and access. And the reason for the perpetual is to ensure that we can come back in quickly after a storm event and renourish again without having to go to, you know, hundreds of people to get new easements from them for temporary rights. And so once you get the perpetual, then you can continuously renourish those beaches. I know it's a headache for the administrative part of trying to go to each and every individual and get them to sign. And with the perpetual, it makes it a lot easier to, you know, go back out and renourish after these storm events.
And we only have 40% right now, approximately, in Indian Rocks Beach that sign that.
47.
47.
Oh, wait, no, in Indian Rocks Beach, yeah, about 40%.
About 40%. I would think, I don't know if any notice was sent out regarding the meeting tonight. Did something go out to our residents? Because I heard that, you know, people, there wasn't much advance notice. I know with the pandemic and Zoom, it's hard for people to keep a handle on some of these meetings, but did the county send something out? Who sent out a notice? When
The city.
was it sent?
The city sent out the notice for us.
Okay, and do you, on behalf of the city, does anyone know when that was mailed out? So there was adequate time for people to respond?
Commissioner Flagg,
Yes,
that was mailed out a week prior to the meeting.
okay, thank you,
And it was also posted on the city website.
okay. And as the mayor suggested, maybe another meeting a few months down the road where we can do both in person and Zoom meetings so we can get more involvement and explain you know, it's pretty serious if we have no renourishment in Indian Rocks Beach.
Yeah,
And
it is.
it's
And as Jim can,
gonna be devastating.
as Jim Legrone can probably speak to, Indian Rocks Beach is a very big and important portion of this nourishment project.
Yeah.
Based on the you know, the amount of erosion we get. This is a very important segment. Yes, and we do plan to have another meeting. We'll have to figure out the best venue for that. I'm not sure if we will be able to have anything in person anytime soon. You know, we all hope we will, but I don't know that you know,
Sure.
is
So it
realistic.
looks like we have 2 hands raised so far for those who are watching, our attendees, our residents. And I do want to give them some time to ask their questions and answer. So I'll just start with the first one. It looks like the name is Galaxy A20. So I don't know exactly what your name is, but I'd ask when you are allowed to talk, please give your full name and your address. And I will give you 2 minutes. Please keep it to the 2 minutes. I know it's a question, but we can all get lengthy in our questions as well as our answers. And then we'll, and if you have a specific person to direct it to, John or the Army Corps, please say that as well. So Galaxy A20, you're on.
Okay, am I there now?
Yes, you
Hello.
are.
Okay, so a few years ago,
Please state your full name
sorry,
and your
I'm sorry.
address for the record. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I'm Don House, 2104 Beach Trail. A few years ago, I missed a meeting that had an issue that I thought was very important. And so I made sure that that would never happen again. And I went to the city and I got on the email list for notifications of all meetings and hearings that should be of public importance. And it's working because on September the 15th, I got a notice that Hallowfest, scheduled for October the 24th, had been canceled. In other words, the city gave me 40 days notice that kids were not going to get their free candy. The only notice I got on this came yesterday. My neighbor got his today. My neighbor got 6 hours notice, but I was generous, and y'all were generous with me. I got 1 day notice. So I got 1 day notice where y'all want me to cede my property rights. So from the city standpoint, it is 40 times more important that we let kids know they're not going to get free candy than it is for me to cede my property rights. I don't know what kind of trick you're trying to pull, but you're not going to get a treat from me. So next time, let's do this right. The information is decent, but this is not the right way to do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody have any comments or anything you want to share from our panelists? Okay, so we will go on to the next hand raised, which is Chris Kerr. I also see that you had questions in the text. So if they are separate than the ones in the text, then we, or if they're the same as the one in the text, then we won't duplicate those as well. So Chris, you are up next. And please state your full name for the record and your address, please, and you'll have 2 minutes to talk, to ask your question. Chris? I think you need to unmute on your end, Chris.
Go ahead.
Hi, this is Lisa Kerr, 36 Gulf Boulevard. And I had 2 questions. One is I wanted to know what has changed because we've lived here for 20 years and we've gotten beach renourishment before. We never had to sign an easement. So that's my first question. And my second question is that while I appreciate all the information about the importance of the sand, is I don't think anybody's saying they don't want sand. It's the language of the easement that you really need to focus on if you want to try to change people's opinions. And that is the thing that is most concerning to folks. We all want the sand and we've always gotten the sand, but now something has changed that we suddenly need to sign these easements.
This is Jim Garrell with the Corps, and the policy for the Corps of Engineers has been around since 1996 that we require perpetual storm damage reduction easements. And so this isn't a new thing for us. You know, I don't know the history on this particular project, but I didn't know if some of the sand was placed seaward of the ECL or not. But we always require perpetual storm damage easements since 1996.
Yes, this is Chris Kerr, and the sand has been placed 2 or 3 times since 2001 westward of the ECL, which is all that, as far as we're concerned, and that's all public access land. That all belongs to the state and is controlled by the state. And we have never had any sand placed to the east of the ECL. And we, as far as we're concerned, we don't need any additional sand to the east of that line. And we're very reluctant, and I think most of the homeowners are very reluctant to give up control of that land. If the state needs that, they can condemn that property and take control of it if they think it's necessary. But it doesn't appear to be necessary to grant public access, which the public already has to all of that beach westward of the ECL.
I can add a bit to that in that I think the problem lies with the fact that the Corps wants these easements to cover areas where sand was placed back in 1990, prior to the initial development of the 1996 easement language. So because that's part of the project area and they plan to replace that sand if it gets damaged during a hurricane, they want to make sure that that easement is in place so that they can do that. Because they, I think it's of the Corps' opinion that you've placed sand all the way up to the seawall throughout the project area. Isn't that correct, Jim?
Yes, that would go to either the seawall or some other, if there's not a seawall, some other landmark.
And I think it's from looking at the photos and the aerials, it's pretty evident that prior to, especially the 1991s, at least some sand at some elevation was probably placed up to the seawall. There's very little beach there. There may be a little bit of dry sand, but considering the elevation of what the constructed project is to, sand was likely placed all the way up to the seawall. And that's what they currently want those easements to cover. Keep in mind that this is the Corps policy, so.
Right, and part of the problem is that if this land is needed for public use, the homeowners are continuing to pay taxes on that land all of these years. And if the state and the government really believes that that public use is necessary, public access and public control and public use of that land, they have the capability of condemning that property and paying the homeowners for it and relieving them of the responsibility to continue to pay property taxes on that.
I would refer you to the property appraiser's office to determine whether you're paying property taxes or on that portion of property. I believe for many of these areas, the parcel lines stop at the seawall.
Yeah, well, ours does not.
Okay, some do, some don't. That's what it's a generalization for the project, but.
Hey, this is Will Riley, engineer with the Corps of Engineers. Well, one thing I wanted to mention what the gentleman said about access. I want to be clear too that this does not allow people to traverse your property to access the beach. This is only from the seaward side. So when we're talking about access, it's just people from the beach. That's one thing I want to make clear. It does not give people the right to go across people's property. The second point I wanted to make was when, so we usually do this at the very, very beginning of the project, and, it makes a lot more sense then, because these projects are a 50-year commitment from the government to protect this land. So what we do is we get the land in which we feel that there could be potential construction during that 50-year life cycle, right? So, kind of doing it retrospectively of where that footprint is does seem a little odd, but that's not to say that we may not need that land, following a hurricane or excessive erosion, or gosh, if funding gets pulled for a certain nourishment and we have to skip one, then, we're looking at needing those pieces of property. So just wanted to make clear the general thought process and why we need land under the easements, even though if for some properties, they may not necessarily need that sand right now. It's because it's for the entire life of the project. Go ahead, John.
I'd like to add one more thing, and just a lot of people think it would be easier to just ask for those easements once we need them. Because then, well, if, the dune is eroded away, then the property owner will sign. But, if a God forbid, and I'm knocking on all the wood I have available in my office here, a Cat 3 or a Cat 4, came up the coastline and actually eroded the beach down to the point where we needed that, it's highly unlikely that people will be back in their homes along the beaches in any kind of a realistic time frame. So that puts you in a position where you're trying to do easement acquisition and everyone's scattered to the wind all over the place. It's not really feasible to obtain easements in that kind of a post-storm condition when windows are blown out of condos and people are someplace else. They aren't going on property appraiser to update their address so that I can figure out where they are. So
And John,
I'll say up here, Don, after Hurricane Matthew passed, we had the ability to come back to Duval County's beaches and get a dredge there 3 months after that storm. And that's because we had everything in place and ready to go. So the quick response, certainly from an engineering standpoint, is so vital to be able to just get right back out there and protect that infrastructure.
And Will or John, can you answer what would be the financial cost or consequence, or the beach cost or consequence for skipping a nourishment, say, for 4 years?
Stand by, sorry. The financial consequence of skipping it, well, you'd potentially be leaving yourself more vulnerable for that time period. So certainly you have more risk. And that I actually want to talk about that real quick about potentially skipping a nourishment. So John, you were mentioning something that wasn't entirely correct. And Jim Corral, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this. We can't just skip properties and portions of the beach and go ahead and fill only portions of the project and just call it blanket that's what we're going to do. There is a ramification to skipping properties and large segments of the beach, and that is these projects are evaluated on a benefit to cost ratio, and it's throughout the entire project length. So as you start not providing the level of protection in which Congress has told us to do, there is a reevaluation that needs to happen to whether this project is actually feasible or not. Is it in the best interest of the federal government? So what that does is that will usually trigger what we used to call an LRR, a limited reevaluation report. There's lower levels of that depending on how big of a change it is. But once there's a substantial change in the project, and skipping large portions of the beach, I think is considered a large change in the project needs to be revisited through a 3x3 study, typically 3 years, $3 million. And then the entire cost share of the project needs to be reevaluated. So right now you mentioned you have about a 60% cost share. Our cost share is determined by the number of public access points and parking and all that. So if there's certain portions where the public access, there was more of it, but they got cut out, your cost share can actually go down. So all of that needs to be really re-looked at once the project goes through any sort of substantial change. So with that being said, having a scheduled nourishment and then all of a sudden last minute taking large portions of it out, that will likely turn into a delay of the actual nourishment.
Yeah, I don't think I was clear during the when I stated that, but that's what I kind of meant by hopefully I would count us lucky if we could still do Belleair Beach and Clearwater since it's a continuous segment of easements. But in talking to our product manager, it might have been Laurel, our previous one, it would probably need an LRR in order to, that is a big change. So, and then at that point, if you do an LRR, you're essentially limiting the product to that, and trying to re-add other areas back in later, I believe requires a whole nother study. So it's not like you can just, hop on the train at the next stop and you're good to go. It's, once it leaves the station, it's gone.
That's correct.
Okay, looks like our next question is from Mason Allen. Again, please state your full name and your address, and then you'll have 2 minutes to ask your question. And Mason, I think you have to unmute on your end.
Okay, is it unmuted now?
You're good. Go ahead.
Okay. Mason Allen, 2105 Beach Trail. I've been around that beach since the 70s, and even before that as a child. But is any study being done about what's happening in the water as a result of all of these renourishments? Because a couple of things are very obvious for those of us who have lived there a long time. And the most concerning one to me is most of the marine life, except for fish, is long gone after the first nourishments. When's the last time you saw a horseshoe crab? If you don't know the history of horseshoe crabs, the reason you don't see them is they only birth their next horseshoe crab in the place where they're from. So for those, we destroyed the place where they're from. So consequently, We gave them a new from place, so they're gone. The other thing is, has any consideration been given, instead of bringing in sand from somewhere else, is dredging back the yards of sand that now make up the bottom of the water offshore? Because now you have to walk out to the speed markers to get waist deep in water. So it seems to me like there's a lot of sand that could just be pulled back in. I've been on those beaches since the 50s as a child, and you could be swimming in the water all the time on Clearwater Beach, these beaches down here, when you were about 5 or 10 yards offshore. So the damage that's been done through all this, so we can pat ourselves on the back and saying we're doing something economic and good for the community and tourism, has been pretty much a disaster for the critters living in the water.
And Mason, your 2 minutes is up. I just appreciate your comment. We'll just give a chance for everyone. And we also have a couple text answers.
Okay,
Again,
just one more thing. The
sorry,
write-up,
we gotta keep the time limit for everyone. So
the write-up you showed said that.
Hey, I can maybe help address those real quickly. So for each one of our projects, we do have to do a full environmental study. So we have to adhere to NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, where we consult with all of the applicable environmental agencies, the federal agencies. So that full study was done at the beginning of the project, and then it will be re-looked at through supplemental environmental assessments as time goes on. We also have to adhere to all state environmental policies. We go through the federal Florida Department of Environmental Protection and get a joint coastal permit, who also collaborates with the different state agencies. So all of that is looked at, from sea turtles to marine life through National Marine Fisheries. So yes, that is all looked at through our projects, and must be justified to not cause detrimental impacts, or unless we have to, otherwise we would have to mitigate for it. Your second question about dredging immediately offshore, from a beach performance process standpoint, that's typically not a good idea. So anything within the littoral system where sand is still moving around, you'd essentially be creating a hole there, like a sink. You can imagine, as you dig like right by the shoreline, as water kind of runs over it, it fills back in and sucks sand away. So if we were to create a hole, a dredge barrow area too close to the shore, that dredge barrow area will essentially, suck some of the sand that we're trying to keep onto the beach. Over.
Also, let me add on to that. This is Jim LaGrone, the coastal engineer on the project. It's also in the state, they call that beach scraping. And it is illegal, especially they will not get that a permit. So that's what I mean, illegal. They will not permit that, especially associated with exactly what you're talking about, horseshoe crabs. Horseshoe crabs, like you said, they do nest where they are very familiar with. And like what Dr. Bishop had earlier, in the shoreline back before, like Elena, there wasn't much shoreline there, and they were somewhat nesting, but then after Elena, there was no more beach left. So I'll see if I can find an old report that kind of states this, but like Will was saying, that is a part of our NEPA process. And we do look at, what has changed since we've been doing placement, and we monitor it during construction and after construction with the use of monitoring reports. Thank you for letting me respond.
Okay, looks like we have a couple of text questions that came in. So I'll go first with Nancy Obarski asked, how much sand was placed in the easement areas in Indian Rocks Beach in 2018? That was landward of the ECL. Do we have a breakdown, John, of specifically Indian Rocks Beach in 2018, or do you have a number offhand? I know we have the full project, but I'm not sure if there's a landward of the ECL, what was placed. You're muted, John.
You're on mute, John.
I don't have that exact number, but the only area that would be landward of the ECL during the 2018 project was, hold on a second, at the south end of Indian Rocks Beach. So as we've discussed, first of all, the seaward limit of all these easements is the erosion control line. And so the only place that the Corps would have needed to put sand, it physically needed an easement because they were putting it on the easement area, would have been at the south end. So it would have been some in here, some in here, and some in here.
John, can you get that number and give it to our staff?
I don't have a way of calculating that number.
Okay.
The Corps would, I mean, you'd be talking about looking at the beach profiles, probably the pay surveys or whatever the Corps uses to calculate the actual volume placed, and you'd have to slice it by the erosion control line to see what was, placed landward of that. But considering the elevations and stuff, I would imagine, I don't know, I guess I'm not going to speculate. I probably shouldn't just throw random numbers out there because they could be wildly inaccurate.
Can anyone on the Corps give an update to that? Any ideas or any possible way that we could get that calculated for residents?
Well, they're answering that. I mean, I think we've been pretty clear during the project during this talk that a lot of these easements aren't needed to physically place sand on currently, but because, the Corps put sand here back in 1990, and because they want to be ready to put sand here if this shoreline moves over to here or here. Because, none of us can predict in 2 years what this vegetation line will look like. We all hope it's still there, but, it can move overnight.
Thank you, John. The next question we have is from Rita Sassini. I'm sorry if I am butchering the last name. So Rita is asking, who are we granting easements to, the City of Indian Rocks Beach or the Corps? And she's on 520 Beach Trail, Unit 3.
It's actually to Pinellas County. The part of our agreement with the Army Corps, our project agreement requires us to obtain the real estate they need for the project. They determine the easement language, but we're the sort of the pass-through that needs to collect the easement itself.
We have another question from Nancy Obarski. She asks, when the Army Corps proposed the first easement for 2018, why did they ask for things they eventually didn't need, since the dune construction element has now been removed? If they didn't need elements they initially asked for, what else are they asking for now that they don't need?
This is Jim Brown. And so, our perpetual easement is a standard language across the country. And so that's what we ask for. That's what our headquarters requires. So you saw from John's earlier slideshow that there are numerous projects along the coastline of the continental US. And all of those core projects need to have a consistent easement language in order for there to be uniformity. Otherwise, you have situations where you have one project that, one's perpetual, the other one doesn't. And so you have a hodgepodge of easements. And in order to have consistency for these 50-year projects, it needs to be uniform.
That looks like those are all of the questions that came in. We do have a couple of comments that we can forward up. Again, if you have any questions that have not been answered, feel free to raise your hand as an attendee, and we will grant you access and you can speak and ask your question to John or the Army Corps, or if you don't feel like doing that, you can text it in to the Q&A. So we'll just give a little bit of time. Are there any more questions from the commission, from Mayor Kennedy, now that you've heard a little more from John and the Army Corps?
No more questions.
I see one from Commissioner.
Yes, I'm just curious, you know, residents are so concerned about their property rights, not just our little section, but we're talking the whole coastline of the United States. Is this an impossible task the Army Corps is trying to do? I mean, are you going to get a segment, a whole area that you can do a beach renourishment on, considering the property right issues that so many people have? I mean, is it feasible?
Yeah. Hey, ma'am, this is Will Riley. So I've been involved in a few of these projects now. It is quite a lift. You're not mistaken. I commend John for starting early on this. We've recently gone through this over in St. Johns County, where we've obtained all the necessary easements that we need. We're doing it right now in Flagler County. We've received every single easement except for 2 necessary easements. And we're unable to do the project unless the county gets those 2 easements. Wow. So we're just in standby mode. The county is pursuing condemnation over those 2 properties. But until then, the project in which was authorized and told to us to implement by Congress is not being achieved if we don't have those 2 easements. Without that, the project is not going to go forward. So yes, it is a challenge and it is hard. And that's why we try to start this process very early.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you
You're
very
welcome.
much.
Well, thank you for coming, and we definitely will want to have another meeting down the road, and so that we keep the lines of communication open and with not only the Corps of Engineers, but also the residents of Indian Rocks Beach. So we have a better understanding. As you can see, there are a lot of questions that a lot of the residents didn't understand. And I'm just hoping that we can get a middle ground here with everyone, and so that we can continue the beach renourishment. Thank you. And whatever else you have, Ashley, I see Commissioner Flagg's hand up, and again.
I'm sorry, but I think if we plan this again, maybe we can make a note that notices and publications can go out minimum of 30 days in advance. So, you know, with mail situations the way they are, it would behoove us to do that. Okay.
Yes, I think that's a good idea, Diane.
All right. Thank you.
Anything else, Ashley?
I don't think so, unless John or the Army Corps have any last words, last things to let us live by.
You know, I'll unless the Army Corps wants to speak after me, but I'll just and like always, correct me if I'm wrong, because most of what I'm doing these days is stating Corps policy, which is a dangerous thing when you don't work for the Corps. But basically, the Corps wants, their current policy is they need these easements where their project is. Their project, like it or not, started in '88. These easements weren't initially obtained then because they didn't exist. They want them now over these areas in order to continue the project. I think it's easy to talk about how that dune line can change and those areas can suddenly become necessary, and that's true. It's very difficult to plan a project funding-wise several years out when you have a moving target, and then suddenly you can't nourish half of your beach because you suddenly need easements that you didn't need prior. But ultimately, it comes down to it's a core requirement. And it's a requirement the Corps has in order to contribute 60% of the funding for these projects. And also on top of that 60% of funding, through the state system of funding, it makes it harder if you don't have a federal project to get state funding, because federal projects get about 15 more points in their scoring system. So then you have to have higher points just to compete against the other federal projects, which are big and tend to suck up a lot of money. The state's budget for the last couple of years for this has only been about $50 million, and that's a record high. But when you consider that one nourishment project can cost $42 million, you know, it gets very expensive very quickly. And I don't picture that 42 going down for the next, if we were to fill the full Sankey template again, I don't think it would drop very much, because if you look at the volumes we're placing and the time frames in between, a lot of it's just, you know, cost of living increase essentially. You know, these are now going to be $40 million projects, and next year they're going to, you know, in 10 more years, they'll probably be $50 million projects. And letting all the sand wash away will make it that much more expensive and difficult to put it back. If you think it's expensive to put 1.3 million cubic yards out there, try 2.6. If we have to do double the size, it's going to be double the cost. Then you're looking at $80 million. And I can't imagine that the Corps has that much money floating around that they want to spend on our project, but it would be great if they did.
I'll mention one too, John, which is one of the greatest benefits that our sponsors say about being in the program is the eligibility for the FCCE funding. And that's when a storm of significance passes and there's a threshold of volume loss, the Corps will come in and pay 100% of those losses of those storms. And like you said, John, knock on wood, Pinellas County has been, you know, spared from some of the big hits, but, you know, some of our sponsors over here on the East Coast, you know, your Brevard counties and even up in Duval, they've benefited quite a bit over the last decade or so from more or less free projects. So that would be zero cost share by the county for those. So that's a really big perk of being in the federal system for shore protection projects. You're on mute, John.
The most recent project, the amount of sand, and these are rough numbers, just I'm pulling them out of my head. So, but I believe that the Corps, the FCCE funds to the Corps, they attributed about between Hermine and Irma together, I think between 300 and 400,000 cubic yards of sand out of 1.3 million. So about a third of the project was totally paid by FCCE funds. And keep in mind too, that neither of those storms were over tropical storm conditions as they went through the county. So Hermine offshore was only a tropical storm to begin with. Irma, as bad as it was, from talking to emergency management, we never, as bad as the damage was here, we never actually received anything more than tropical storm force winds within the county's boundaries. So, you know, between those two storms, we had a third of our project right there. So that's also a testament to how much sand can be lost under, you know, relatively minor storm conditions.
And John, how much is that per linear foot does the nourishment cost?
I think when I ran these numbers, a linear foot, the nourishments were running between, let's just say around $900 to $1,000. So a 200 foot long area is about $200,000 worth of sand, roughly.
Well, I think we can leave it at that. Thank you guys so much. Thank you, Mayor Kennedy, Commissioners, Army Corps, and John for all coming together. I know it's tough to get everyone's schedules to align and for us to get this out to the community. I know it's very helpful to the residents of Indian Rocks Beach and all the residents along the shoreline to really understand the impact and understand what these easements mean and the language. I know there's a lot of concerns. I appreciate everyone, all the attendees for coming in. Looks like I think at our peak we had about 24 attendees. I think next time we give a little more notice that we can have significantly more people. I would just ask those that were in attendance to spread the word, talk about the easements. If you have questions that we weren't able to answer, you can email signforsand@pinellascounty.org. Again, that's signforsand@pinellascounty.org if you have any more questions. And we can also put you on an email list for anything beach nourishment wise to go out when you email that account as well. And you can also head to pinellascounty.org for any of your questions about the Nourishment project. John, do you have the specific website up?
Yeah, actually, also for people who weren't able to attend this meeting, you can always spread the word that on our coastal management website, which if you go to pinellascounty.org and look at departments and go under coastal management, there is a link along the left-hand side for beach easements. Click on that. That takes you to our beach easements webpage. And we have a lot of stuff on there, from this easement tracking map to that comparison map of 1990 and 2014. The link says 1990 and after 1990. Oh, I guess that makes sense. Sorry, I'm editing myself live on the call. That's great. But at the bottom, an important thing is this presentation will be up there. And then there's also, and there's the webinar, but there's also YouTube videos from the Reddington Shores meeting and the Indian Shores meeting, which have all covered a lot of information. So people can watch those as many times and get easemented out, and all the information that they need to know is probably right in there. And that'll make them ready for the next time when we're able to meet in person. But essentially there'll be 3 meetings that they can listen to.
And I'll say it again one more time, if you still have any questions, if you weren't able to get your full question or comments out during this webinar, please email us at signforsand@pinellascounty.org. And I'm sure you can direct any specific questions as well to the city mayor or commissioners. Do you guys have an email or phone number that people can call as well?
ckennedy@irbcity.com. And if it's sent to me, the rest of the commission will also receive it.
Thank you so much, Mayor. Again,
Good to see you.
Good to
We'll
see you too.
definitely again.
Absolutely. We will see everyone again. I'm looking forward to it. An exciting, eventful Wednesday evening. So appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Bye now.